Though, let's talk to David Simmonds, who's an MP and chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Migration. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning, Julia.
What do you make of this policy?
It's a very clear difference between the Conservatives and Labour, that we've seen the compassion of the British people. The UK's taken in 150,000 refugees from Ukraine, 20,000 from Syria, many from Afghanistan, 300,000 or more from Hong Kong. What we don't want is uncontrolled arrivals across the Channel. Now, we know the UK is not a particularly popular destination with people coming into the European area. So this plan that Keir Starmer's outlined would mean a very significant increase in the numbers of uncontrolled arrivals in the way that we're determined to stop. Labour have voted against all the legislation that the government have brought forward to try and deal with this. We don't want to see people putting their lives at risk, getting in small boats across the English Channel. We need to change that. We are beginning to see those numbers reduce. We've seen fantastic work already done by the National Crime Agency. I've met the people doing that work in France at the moment, tackling the people smugglers. We don't want to put that at risk.
Well, yeah, I mean, we definitely don't want to put that at risk. But the thing is, we're not tackling the people smugglers on a grand scale. On one level, treating people smugglers like terrorists sounds good, freezing their assets, apparently restricting their movements. It's all very well. But you know as well as I do, you can arrest as many people smugglers as you want. While there is still a demand and an incredibly lucrative market, another person is going to turn up, another criminal gang is going to turn up to do this. They make too much money from it.
We're already arresting a lot of those people, and you will have seen coverage in the media of trials where people have been jailed for doing exactly that work. Now, based on my experience of talking to the people doing this work in France, for example, the people who head up these gangs, a bit like the drug gangs, are often based far beyond the reach of law enforcement agencies, for example, in places like the more disorganised parts of Iraq, where law enforcement agencies simply cannot get at those individuals. And it's clear there is more that we can do, and I think it's right that the Prime Minister, for example, is negotiating with the European Union about participating in Frontex, the border agency, looking at how we can use our expertise to stop people being smuggled across the Mediterranean. So rather than ever getting to the shores of France and putting themselves in a boat.
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? I mean, I can see a point in about the next 10 years, they're going to try and build a wall around the whole of the southern border of the EU because this crisis is so extreme. And when we see, we've seen these disasters in places like Libya. We had that earthquake in Turkey, months ago. When you see these crises and you see the sort of failures of a lot of these nations and war going on elsewhere, we are going to be seeing more and more people coming to trying to get into European borders, and they're going to try and make their way to the country where they think they've got the best bet of having a better life. For a lot of them, if they do have English as a second or third language, Britain is going to be where they want to go. In terms of the possibility of the quota system, now, we know that's how the EU is planning to deal with this issue. There's already a massive issue within the EU, Eastern European nations, where they've been saying no to an awful lot of stuff that's being imposed on them by Brussels, and they're saying they're not happy with this. The idea that we would, on the basis, the quota basis that the EU is currently using, we would have had to take 120,000 migrants last year out of the million who arrived in the EU. There's no way in the world that that is going to be acceptable to the British public. Not a chance. Why on earth would Labour think that that would be an acceptable policy?
Well, Brussels has never had power to impose such a thing. They're looking to do a deal. And if I was one of those Eastern European countries seeing the pressure that's already happening on my borders, I wouldn't want to sign up to that either. And we know countries like Germany, that are already taking 3-4 times as many refugees as the UK, are keen to secure a deal and to try and find terms for that. But you're absolutely right. This is not something that works for us as an island nation. We want to have effective control of our borders. There's a reason why the UK, after the US, is the biggest donor to refugee support efforts abroad. We know most refugees want to be able to return to their home country. That's why we're funding arrangements through camps and through support to keep people safe. So when the situation stabilises, they're able to go home. And that should be our priority.
They're not going to go home. They're not going to go home. Doesn't matter. Afghan could be as stable as you want. It's not going to be a better place to live than the UK or in any European country. This is pie in the sky, middle class Islington dinner party claptrap, with all due respect, David Simmonds. It's not going to happen. People, billions of people in this world are living in poorer countries. I mean, we think our country's broken. We think our country doesn't work properly. Try living in most of the world. They're going to want to come to Europe. They're going to come to countries where they speak the language like England. Country, by the way, where we don't, for instance, have ID cards to to get about, and so therefore people find it easier once you're in to stay around. And we're putting people up in 3-4 star hotels. the fact that Labour can think they can get away with even suggesting this tells us what an abject failure the Tory policy on this has been. At the end of the day, we've seen a massive increase in the number of people coming across the channel, a massive increase in the number of people who don't get processed, a massive increase in the cost of housing those people and funding them being here while they're not working, as they rightly should not be allowed to do. This has really only come about because of Tory failings on this issue. Is that not right?
The vast majority of refugees go to the country next door to their own country.
Yeah.
They stay there and then they go home when they can. So that's absolutely clear. We know that, and that's been always the case. But I think the UK has shown compassion if we look at the response from the British people to the situation in Hong Kong, where people have said, it's just not acceptable for people who have a right to come to the UK to be oppressed in the way that they have been. The government has issued those visas. People have come. And I know in my own constituency here, which is very diverse, has taken generations of refugees. It's simply not been an issue. People have integrated into the local community without a problem. What we don't want to see is the kind of uncontrolled migration. Large numbers of people, we don't know who they are, we don't know where they come from, we don't know whether they have any right or any connections to the UK, getting in small boats across the channel and putting their lives and the lives of children, vulnerable people with them, at risk. And that's why the government's brought forward the legislation that it has. And we need to strike that balance. The British people are compassionate. We always have been. We've responded not just to recent crises, but ones going back many, many decades. My constituency is full of people who fled from Nazi oppression in Europe, and the British people opened their hearts and their homes to those people. So we need to make sure we strike that balance that we've got.
Yeah.
And
but again, then you talk about, but you've got to remember, people don't trust the Tory party or the Labour Party on this issue because of failures. You know, you guys have been in power for the last 13 years, many different prime ministers, I know. But also, when it comes to legal migration, even legal migration, your prime ministers have broken those pledges and those promises again and again and again. 606,000 net. So it was over 1 million in total who arrived in this country from abroad, legally in this country. When we used to have a promise it would be in the tens of thousands, not in the hundreds of thousands. Those are people coming legally with visas issued by the British government. You've totally failed on the stuff you can control.
And of course, those people are coming for the most part to work in the NHS and the care sector, where we have, and I as a constituency MP have lots of people saying, I'm struggling to get an appointment. I need to make sure that there are more nurses, more GPs. And those are the people that
by the way, after David Cameron limited the number of people who can train as doctors and nurses, you created this problem and then you solved it by flying more people in from abroad.
But we're seeing huge demographic change in the UK as well. And we're not the only country that's struggling with this. Across the Western world and across the United States, we have an ageing population and a shrinking workforce, and we need to find a way to address that.
Well, here's an idea. Why don't we make it possible for people not to live their 20s and 30s in debt from universities, which barely provide any service at all, and build some houses so people can actually afford a home and settle down, and then maybe they'd have more kids?
Well, I agree with the point about building houses. As you know, the government's brought forward a plan to unlock more than 100,000 planning permissions.
100,000, 100,000. That's pie in the sky. We need 2 million new homes.
Well, where I am in my constituency, we've got great local authorities that have delivered more than their housing targets over the last few years to help young people and families that are expanding to get on the housing ladder, which I think is the right thing to do.
All right.
But we need to ensure that that fits with a national strategy and balance the needs of communities not to be overwhelmed by new houses without the infrastructure that needs to go with.
OK. David Simmonds, I've given you a hard time. You're the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Migration as Conservative MP. Appreciate you joining us.